Hey guys, thank you for being oh so patient with me. I know you guys were expecting to be able to see my face while I'm sharing this information with you. Unfortunately, you know how it is sometimes, it's very hard to share what you need to share whilst looking at a screen intently. Regardless, hopefully you find anything I say mildly interesting. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Cheyenne Stonechild. I am Cree and Irish from Fort Qu'Appelle, Saskatchewan, Musqueam First Nations. I was raised here in Vancouver, British Columbia, and because I was raised here in beautiful British Columbia, a lot of my experience is based here. And because of that, I have been deeply in contact with the Ministry of Child and Family Development and the Vancouver Aboriginal Child and Family Services Society. And what an experience it was, let me tell you. Here's one of the things I'd like you guys to focus on today. It's in regards to the Roots Workers program. So maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. Regardless, I'll give you a brief description of what it's supposed to be. The Roots Workers program consists of practitioners who's focused on researching and facilitating a strong connection to extended family members, home communities, bands, and nations. In 2019, there were only 16 Roots practitioners in British Columbia, serving over 2,000 Indigenous children in care. Take a moment to think about that. In MCFD mainstream, over half the children in care are Indigenous. And in delegated agencies, all of the children should be Indigenous. That's a high number of Indigenous children in care to be serving responsibly and with the quality of care needed to be successful with the goal of establishing a solid relationship with extended family, bands, nations, and/or reserves. And here is the other problem. The Canadian government recognizes over 630 distinct Indigenous communities. Think about what that means for a Roots practitioner. They would have to be exceptional at research, making connections, and also being knowledgeable enough about the various nations, the protocol, the language, and how to talk to these people. It is an absurd request to make of these practitioners. It is not that it should be done, it is that it cannot be done, and it hasn't. No one alive is that knowledgeable. And no 16 people banding together to serve over 2,000 Indigenous children in care with incredibly distinct heritage, language, and just how they are connected to one of over 600 unique communities in Canada. And we haven't even touched whether or not a Roots practitioner should be formally trained in genealogy. And let me tell you, I am 110% behind the fact that yes, they should be. And of course, the Ministry of Child and Family Development and the Vancouver Aboriginal Child and Family Services Society does not make that a requirement to be a Roots practitioner, which, frankly, I think makes little sense because it would be very helpful when actually doing the job of locating the extended family, identifying the communities or culture they belong to. But logic, right? It's not actually a requirement. All you need is to be Graduated from the university with either a bachelor's or a master's, a single course from MCFD, and you're good to go. No, please, don't. I beg you. We already have enough of these problems, and we don't need more. So, what's left for Indigenous children and youth in care? Frankly, not much. They're waiting for service that's specialized with under 20 practitioners on a good day, and most days are not good days. So this job simply isn't being done. So, cultural plans of care are not being carried out to their fullest extent. Regardless of what checkboxes a social worker might check off, that a cultural plan of care is being done adequately, it is not, thus breaching their own policies and not acting in the best interest of the child. You can look up what a cultural plan of care is. There are some templates available on the internet, or you can probably ask a practicing social worker if you can see what they look like. If you're wondering why I have mentioned a cultural plan of care, it is because it is a key component within a social worker's work when working with an Indigenous child specifically. And it is in relation with roots work and family history, i.e. genealogy. Again, my apologies if that is slightly complicated. These things tend to overlap with each other. And finally, this leaves Indigenous children and youth in care to themselves. They have to find this information out for themselves. An overly complicated task that adults can barely do is left to the children to figure out. They often can't obtain this information until after they've aged out of care due to confidentiality reasoning. And I'll give you an example from my own life. So I knew for a fact that I didn't come from a local nation. I was from outside of BC, and that I also potentially had siblings outside of BC. But because I was a minor and the information was out of province under different rules, I was not allowed to request that information myself. My parent had to, or my guardian had to, and they refused me that because of confidentiality reasoning. What I mean by that is they did not think that relationship would be healthy for me and made that decision on my behalf and cut off my ability to access that information until I was of age. That is more common than not. They will cite the best interests of the child, and unless the child has an advocate standing on their behalf to say that is actually not in their best interest, that is the philosophy that will go forward on the child's behalf, which we know is not for them. It works against them. Please keep in mind that in this scenario, a roots practitioner can be an advocate. But I was in care at a time when roots workers were not as common. The program was only just starting to take shape. Final note to this is that racism was also at play. Anyways, I can go on and on about roots practitioners, genealogy, family connection for quite a while, so we will move on from that now. And here we go. In 2019, there was a new act that was introduced that was supposed to directly impact Indigenous communities and Indigenous children and youth in care. Now, this act was called, and no, I did not name it, it is a terrible name, an act respecting First Nations, Inuit, Métis children and youth and families. Dear God. If only people believed it. Anyways, jokes aside, this act was meant to give more power back to the people, the communities, when dealing with Indigenous children and youth in care. Now, This is a federal act, so this is not just provincial. So this means it impacts everyone. Now, one of the things that was constantly critiqued about this was that it is very clear where this act seemed to have stemmed from simply on the language and the context it was framed. It was clearly dreamed up here in British Columbia. And why do I say that? Simply because it does not easily apply to every other province. It does not take into consideration that in other provinces, how nations and bands operate are drastically different. They are at different points in time. Some bands still do not have access to clean water. Some bands still do not have enough housing to house their people, despite being on their own land. It's absurd. And it is not a matter of whether or not the nation, the bands, want their children in their care. It is simply that they do not have the capacity to have their children in their care, nor have they been supported to have their children in their care. It has been quite the opposite. Remember, children have been taken out of their care, not put back into their care. Now, we can also touch back on the earlier subject, genealogy, roots work. So, if roots work is not being done, and these children are not being correctly identified with their nation or band, how exactly do the Ministry of Child and Family Development and the Vancouver Aboriginal Child and Family Service Society expect to actually have a solid connection between the two? I don't know. But if there's no linking documentation, that child's not going to go home. So there are a variety of problems here. And not to mention, there are a lot of children here that still do not know where they came from. If we're expecting MCFD or VACFSS to make the call first to the nation that may or may not have the capacity to care for the kid, can't tell if it's the egg or the chicken that comes first in this scenario on who screwed up, but I would definitely say the government did not think this one through. And many people agree. Final note, there has been zero conversations of money. So the Ministry of Child and Family Development, the Vancouver Aboriginal Child and Family Services Society, a delegated agency, and these nations all across Canada are supposed to have a smooth transition between the two with no plan in place nor money attached. Bloody brilliant, I tell you. Go Canada. No, but really, there needs to be a greater conversation held with these agencies and the government of Canada and the nations. This should have happened before this act came out because there was no plan of transition and there was no way to facilitate this smoothly and there was no communication between the provinces. So this puts everyone at a huge disadvantage and does a disservice to children and youth in care. Anyways, I've been talking now for about 15 minutes, so I just wanted to say thank you for listening along. I wish I had more time to go through this more in depth with you guys, but maybe there'll be another time for me to come back and talk more. So just do your own research for now. Go check out the act. Go check out what various people are saying online. There's been some critiques that have been public. And if you have the chance, also look at some Indigenous genealogy stuff. It's very interesting and very different. You'll see some of what I've been talking about and other things I did not have time to touch on. With that said, take care, you guys. Look out for yourselves. Keep looking. Keep searching. Good luck.